Okay, first things first. This is the attendance password for today. If you are if you are attending this class in the physical classroom, it is SC6CW0. So the last character is a 0 and not not an O. Okay, so let's take a couple of minutes to take attendance. And in the meantime, I am going to maybe write a couple of things on the board. Okay, before we start, let's see. Okay, are you guys able to take attendance? Okay, good. Okay, see. What about you guys that are on Zoom? Okay, good. Let me close this out first. Okay, so the plan for today is it's kind of rather ambitious. We are going to start on a new topic, and it looks like we may. Okay, hold on. I just realized you might not be able to hear me. Okay, we are going to start on a new topic, which is the topic of free will. It looks like, and the way I planned it, we only have today to talk about free will because I was going to get you guys to watch a movie next week, and that is kind of a long movie. It's gonna take basically 4+ sessions next week, and then towards the end of next Thursday, I'll have you discuss discuss certain questions about movie. So it's kind of ambitious to try to get through all of the entire topic of free will today. Not sure if you can do that. However, I will try to cover as much as we can while still being clear. Okay, so here's the deal. I am going to the plan for today is to I'll start by giving you a outline of the free will debate, and then I'll talk about one of these four positions, determinism, and then I will and then what happens is at some point I might get you to watch a short video that I posted on Moodle. It's related to determinism, and then I might actually break you up into groups to talk about that video. Okay, but hold on a second. First things first. Okay, I want to be sure that I have the Moodle page open. Okay, right. So free will. Free will is one of the main questions in the it's one of the major questions in philosophy. One easy way to think about free will is again by thinking about when we were talking about Descartes 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the matrix. So one way to think about free will is again to think about the matrix. So if you are in the matrix, so if you are living in the matrix, and you are all of your experiences are being fed to you, would you still have free will? Would you still have free will if you are living in the matrix and all of the experiences that you have are being fed to you through wires that are attached to your brain? So there is one experiment. There is one thought experiment that some philosophers have come up with. So if you are living, if I'm in a matrix right now, all of the experiences that I have right now are being fed to me through wires. So that means that I might not actually be standing in a classroom talking to a bunch of people about philosophy, right? Because this experience that I have right now of standing in the classroom is being fed to me by a bunch of wires. And then come to think of it, I might not even have the body that I have right now, because again, even my experience of a body that I have is probably being fed to me through a bunch of wires. So if all of my experiences and even my experiences of my body is something that is being fed to me through wires, then it may be that for all we know, I might just be a brain in a bed. So this is a bed, and imagine that this is the brain, and then this is a bunch of this is brain, my brain. And then this is this thing is a bunch of liquids, life-sustaining nutrients that is keeping the brain alive. And then at the same time, there are all these wires that are being attached to the brain. You can imagine that there are probably all these electrodes, and all these wires are feeding. They're basically feeding experiences into my brain. So right now, the experience that I have of standing in the classroom and talking to people is actually fed to me through the wires. My experience of seeing the things that I'm seeing and hearing the things I'm hearing is also fed to me through the wires. So I really, and my experience of my body, same thing, is also fed to me through the wires. So I probably don't even have, so if this is what's going on, then I don't even have a body. It's just, I'm basically just a brain who's being fed all this information. So it's a pretty famous experiment, a famous thought experiment in philosophy. It's called the brain in the bed experiment. Okay, so you can think of free will in this way. If you are a brain in a vat, and all of the experiences that you have are being just are things that are just fed to you through the wires, do you have free will? In other words, if you are a brain in a vat, are the choices that you make still your own free choices? Uh, well, one answer might be yes. You could say, look, even if I'm agreeing with that, even if I'm agreeing with that, it still doesn't change. It still doesn't change the fact that that I am making decisions. I am deciding whether to eat grass today or not. I'm deciding whether to have a burrito or a salad for lunch. So even if I'm agreeing with that, even if these experiences are being fed to me, still doesn't change the fact that the fact that I am making these decisions. So you might say that, but then somebody could say, look, if you are a brain in a vat, then isn't it? It's very possible. It's very possible that no, that your experiences are not the only things that are being fed to your brain. It could be that there could be other wires. There could be other additional wires that are feeding not just experiences but also certain impulses, chemical impulses to your brain, right? So it may be that when I decided to have a burrito rather than salad for lunch, it may be that I decided to have a burrito because a particular chemical impulse was fed to my brain, and that chemical impulse caused my brain to want a burrito, and because it caused my brain to want a burrito, I end up it ends up pushing me. It ends up pushing me to decide on a burrito rather than a salad. Now, and this is where it gets interesting. If every single decision, if every single decision, if every single event and decision that is happening is the result of all of these, chemical, electrical impulses, then that means that all of my actions and all of my decisions, even the smallest decisions like choosing a burrito, all of my actions and smallest decisions are actually the result of all these chemical and electrical impulses. So if my decisions are caused, if I make the decisions that I make because of certain, electrical and chemical impulses, then am I still free? Because if you think about it, if I'm making the decision, if I make the decision to choose, if I chose a burrito instead of a salad because of this chemical impulse that is being fed into my brain, that means that it was determined beforehand that I was going to choose. The chemical impulse basically determined that I was going to choose the burrito before I even decided on the burrito, right? Something happened, the chemical impulse happened in my brain first, which led to a craving for burrito. And then I decided, let's have a burrito for lunch. So the impulse, if the chemical impulse came before the conscious decision or the conscious choice, then you will see that my decision is not free, right? Bracken?
I think you probably have in this exact scenario, you probably have the illusion of free will. Being fed to the wires or whatever, because how does the wires know what to feed you, your choices or anything if there's nothing coming out of your brain? Like, oh, I feel this way, so then I'm going to decide this way. There's nothing coming out, it's just always being fed into your brain. So you have, the illusion of free will, you're not actually, brain isn't contributing anything. Like, you're just constantly being fed information of what's happening. So I would say don't have free will.
Yeah, and that's what and that's basically what a determinist would think. he would say that, look, I mean, if this is possible, and we cannot rule out this possibility, right? We cannot rule out the possibility that we are simply in a matrix and are being fed all these, experiences and impulses. So if this is possible, then we cannot be sure that we are free will, which means that our free will is, is probably an illusion, and so we don't have free will. Let's see. Trinity, was that were you going to say something? Okay. Okay, good. I thought you were. But okay, so right. So I mean, so basically, right? If you understand this, example, then you basically understand determinism. Determinism is basically saying that every event has this. An event is, you can. Event is defined very broadly as being including all kinds of things. So physical events, physical happenings, physical occurrences in the world are events. The sun rising is an event. What else is an event? Human actions. A human action is also an event because you can say that my having a burrito for lunch is an event. So a human action is an event, and then even further, human choices are also events. My choosing to have a burrito is also an event. So if every single event in the universe is determined by some chemical cause or other, then that means that every event in the world has its sufficient natural cause. What is sufficient natural cause? Or you can also say sufficient natural explanation. So what that means is that my having a burrito for lunch is sufficiently explained. Is sufficiently explained by the chemical reaction that happens here. That chemical reaction by itself is totally enough. It's totally enough, totally sufficient to cause me to decide to have a burrito. So, but some people might still be stubborn and they say, look, okay, but it still doesn't change the fact that it still doesn't change the fact that I really do have the experience of deciding to have a burrito. It still doesn't change the fact that, I mean, even if there are all these chemical reactions that are going on, it still doesn't change the fact that just now I was sitting in Taco Bell. I walked past Taco Bell, and then I decided, hey, I want a burrito. So it doesn't change the fact that there was that moment where I decided, hey, I want a burrito. Okay, so you might be stubborn. You might try to say that, look, but the decision is still there, and I still remember making the decision. Doesn't that count for anything? Well, the determinists would say no, it doesn't really count for anything because your decision isn't really you're making the decision isn't really it's not really what's doing the work of getting you to have the burrito. What's really doing the work of getting you to have the burrito is the chemical reaction. It's kind of like, it's kind of, so basically what the determinist will say is that the decision that you make to have the conscious decision that you make to have the burrito is basically kind of like an after effect. It's an after effect. It's not really actually causing causing the action of having a burrito. It's like when I was a kid, let me give you a different example. So when I was a kid, I would drive with my dad in his car, and I would look at I noticed that whenever the car, I'll notice that whenever the speedometer needle moves, the car will move forward. So for a couple of years when I was a kid, I kind of naively thought that it's the speedometer needle that is causing the car to move. So, and I'm sure there are many. I'm sure there are many kids who have thought the
anything as well. But we know, right? We know that the speedometer needle isn't really doing any work. I mean, you know, even if the speedometer on your car were to break, even if you have a broken speedometer, your car can still move. You know, probably not a good idea to drive without a speedometer, but you know, but it's really the engine, right? I mean, it's the internal combustion engine that is doing the work of moving your car. The speedometer doesn't really do anything. In fact, if anything, it's the other way around. It's the internal combustion engine moving the car that causes the speedometer to move. The determinist basically would say that free will. I mean, your choice, the choice that you make to have a burrito is kind of like the speedometer needle. You might think it's doing the work because we might think it's doing the work because we don't know any better. But actually, you know, you can. It's hard to imagine, but you can imagine. You can imagine somebody who is totally not conscious at all, who just basically, you know, who just basically just does everything that I'm doing today. You know, that person could still, so you can imagine a sort of unconscious version of myself, like a zombie version of myself, that is doing exactly the same things that I'm doing today. You know, it goes to the Taco Bell, have a taco, and then comes here and basically opens his mouth and starts saying whatever I'm saying. So you know, but basically you can imagine an unconscious version of myself, doing the zombie version of myself, doing exactly the same things, and you know, and if you can imagine that, which may be hard for some people to do, but if you can at least imagine that, then you will be able to see that consciousness is kind of an after effect. You know, your consciousness is an after effect of whatever is going on in your brain. Just like, you know, just like the speedometer needles moving is an after effect of the engines, you know, turning. So basically, if the chemical reaction in the brain is sufficient by itself to cause your choice, then you know to cause your action. Sorry, yeah. So let me say it again. I have to say it carefully. So if basically if the chemical reactions in your brain are sufficient by themselves to cause your actions, then you really don't need choice. Choice is just, you know, it's just an after effect. It's almost like an appendage. It's something that is just redundant. It's just there, and it doesn't really serve any, you know, purpose. Without choice, without consciousness, you probably still do the same things that you do because all you need is the chemical impulse. So, Brendan?
This, I mean, it's not really off on, but it's a little different. So earlier we talked about free will causing evil. So if free will is not a thing, then
Well, one could say, right? One way to follow up on everything that I just said would be that if you are really a strict determinist, then you would say that there is really no good or evil, because, well, you know, I mean, if it turns out that my robbing the bank, if I rob the bank, not really because of the choice that I made, but because of some chemical reactions that are going on in the brain, then that means that I didn't rob the bank because of free will, because I don't have free will, right? So if I didn't rob the bank because of free will, if I didn't really rob the bank, then, you know, that it would seem that, I mean, if an action is not your free action, if an action is not done freely by you, then we cannot really hold you responsible for the action, right? And we cannot hold you responsible for the action because you did not really do it. Then it will be very strange to judge your action to be good or bad. You will seem to be totally inappropriate to judge your action to be good or bad. Because if an action is not really done by you, then you cannot be responsible responsible for it. And if you're not responsible for it, then we cannot say that the action was good or bad. You're basically like you're basically like a puppet. You're basically, well, well, in this case, you're probably not even a puppet. You're just a brain that is being fed a bunch of impulses. So this is well, it is really interesting. Okay, what's even more interesting? So this is all very it might lead to a sort of I think it seems that if you are a strict determinist, it will lead to a kind of very it lead to a sort of maybe a nihilistic view about morality, because if all of your actions are, if all of your choices, well, you don't really have a choice actually, because all of the actions are determined. So there is no possibility of you doing anything other than robbing the bank, because the chemical impulse is already there. There is no possibility. If there is no possibility of you doing otherwise than doing anything other than robbing the bank, then then you cannot possibly have a choice. And if you don't have a choice, then you cannot be responsible. And if you cannot be responsible, then you'll make no sense. You'll make no sense to say that your action is right or wrong. So so it kind of leads to a rather nihilistic view of morality. Well, I mean, okay. Let me. But it is actually possible. There are some people who would. There are some people who would still insist that it is possible to say that actions are right or wrong, even if you believe in determinism. The idea is this: some people would say, look, even if everything is determined, right? Even if I can predict every single thing you're going to do from now all the way to the end of your life, it still doesn't change. It still doesn't change the fact that there is, that you are making the decision. So suppose I know you very well, right? Suppose I'm a good friend of yours, and I know your character very well, and I know that given your character, you will run into a burning house to save a child. And then tomorrow there is a burning house, and then you end up running into the burning house to save the child. Now, even the fact that your action is so predictable doesn't make it any less good, right? Because it's still a great thing that you ran into the house to save the burning house to save the child. It still doesn't change the fact that it's a great thing that you did. So the idea is this. The idea is that, look, even if science is correct, even if according to science, everything that happens in you is just a result of your chemical impulse, right? Even if you're running into the burning house, it's just a result of a chemical impulse, and we can predict from the beginning of time that you're going to do that. It still wouldn't change the fact that that you actually make the decision to do it. And I mean, it doesn't, never mind the fact that the decision actually is the result of a chemical impulse. But even if that's true, it still doesn't change the fact that a decision was made, and the decision did lead to an action that benefited other people. And so based on that, it seems that we should say that that your action was a good action. And if you, I don't know if you buy that, but if you do buy that, then you are basically a compatibilist. You basically believe that moral judgment and responsibility and free will are all compatible with determinism. So even if determinism is actually true, even if everything is determined because of chemical reactions and all that, we can still say that you did a good thing. We can still hold you responsible for doing the good thing because you made the decision, because you consciously made the decision. And if you did consciously make the decision, then we can still say that you are free, even if everything was determined. So, there are people like John Stuart Mill and David Hume who believe in this compatibilism. Okay. I'm not sure what to think of compatibilism, honestly. Well, let me talk a little bit more about determinism. So one of the, many people these days are determinists, and part of it is because, well, most of it is because of science. There was this very influential, I think this was back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, there was this scientist by the name of Benjamin, I think it's Libet or Libet, I don't know. Okay, Libet. There was this scientist by the name of Benjamin Libet who conducted a series of very interesting experiments on, he basically conducted a series of very interesting experiments which are supposed to show that determinism is really, really true and that free will doesn't really actually exist. Okay, so let's pause for a sec. I'm going to stop talking for a moment and have us watch this video. It's actually on Moodle, so you can watch it later on again if you want to. But yeah, I'm going to have us. So there's this video that explains the Libet experiments. So it's only about 2 minutes. So let's look at it together. Oops, that's the wrong one. Oops. Okay, hold on. Before I do that. Okay, I guess I need to make sure I can share the screen of all you guys that are out there in Zoom. Oh gosh, hold on. Keep forgetting to do this thing. Okay, share computer sound. Okay, so let's look at this together.
Put your hand in front of you and flex your wrist. You presumably first had a thought. Flex my wrist. That then caused your wrist to move. That's how it seems. But Benjamin Libet's experiments in the 1980s have cast some doubt on that. In his neuroscience lab, he wired up subjects to an EEG machine measuring brain activity via electrodes on their scalps, and then asked them to choose to perform a simple hand movement when they felt like it. He also got them to record the time at which they made a conscious decision to move their hands. Disconcertingly, he found evidence of brain activity initiating the movement hundreds of milliseconds before the conscious decision was reported. In other words, his experiments seemed to show that the conscious decision didn't cause the movement. The brain activity bringing about movement started before the individual willed anything to happen. Some people think this is proof that free will is an illusion, that our conscious decisions are more like reports on what is already happening than the causes of our action. Libet didn't go that far. He thought that we might not have free will, but there's still time for what some have called free won't, a conscious veto of an action that is started in the brain. Others are more skeptical about the implications of these experiments. They point out difficulties of recording the time of a subjective decision to move, and question whether Libet's findings could apply to more complex conscious decisions based on reasons, such as the decision to reject the claim that Libet's experiments undermine our idea of free will.
Okay, do I stop this? Okay, thank you for watching.
Yeah, so it looks like, well, forgot that picture. Okay, wait, sorry. Yeah, so according to the batch, this is what's going on. Most of us, right? Most of us think that what's going on in human action is this: there is this conscious thought. In this case, the conscious thought is raise my hand. Actually, I think he used a different example. So the example in this case, the conscious thought is flex my wrist. And then after you have this conscious thought, then it leads to the action, which is flexing wrist. So most people would think that, oh well, if this is what's going on, then the conscious thought that you have, or the conscious decision to flex the wrist, must be what's causing the action of flexing the wrist. But the BETS experiment shows that about a few hundred milliseconds before this, a few hundred milliseconds before you actually had a thought, there is already brain activity. So if the brain activity came before your conscious thought to flex the wrist, then this would seem that it is not the conscious thought of flexing the wrist that's causing you to flex the wrist. It is actually the brain activity that is causing. It looks like the brain activity is causing the conscious thought, and it's also causing the action of flexing the wrist. And so if that is true, then this would suggest that your conscious thought is not really doing the work. It's not really what's responsible for causing you to flex the wrist. It's actually the brain activity. And if all of this is true, then this would seem to suggest that determinism is true. But things get more complicated than this, because Libet actually, as you saw in the video, Libet actually comes in and says, well, he says, I'm not going that far, right? I'm not going that far. I'm not actually saying that determinism is totally true, because he says that even though I can stop the brain activity from happening, it is still possible for he thinks that it is possible, and the keyword is possible because nobody knows if it's true. But the keyword, the thing is that it's possible that we can still consciously veto the brain. So there's still a possibility of consciously vetoing the brain. So you can basically, what I think is saying is that maybe after the brain activity has happened, and after you have had a conscious thought of flexing the wrist, you can still, at this point between the thought and the action, it's still possible for you to veto. It's still possible for your consciousness to veto the action. So maybe I'm thinking, okay, flex my wrist, but then I can also think, no, don't do it. So but when I say don't do it, basically I'm vetoing my conscious decision. So he's saying maybe he's suggesting that the veto is still possible, because even if you cannot stop the brain activity from happening, even if you cannot stop this conscious thought from happening, you can still consciously veto the thought. And if you veto the thought, then you basically stop the action. You can basically still stop the action from happening. So okay, so conscious veto is possible.
Okay, I actually have a question for you guys. I kind of want to hear your opinions on your thoughts on all this. So, the question is this. Let me. I forgot to type it out earlier today, so I'm going to have to do it right now. Okay, I'm going to share my screen so all of you in Zoom can see what I'm doing. Okay, so the question is this. Question. Okay, question. If Lebet is right, that if Lebet is right that conscious vetoing brain activity, if this is possible, if conscious vetoing of brain activity is possible, then the question is, can we have, if Lebet is right that conscious vetoing of brain activity is possible, can we have free will? Or do we have free will? Okay, so I'm about to break you up into groups to discuss this question. If you are on Zoom, please take a moment to to either memorize this question or write it down somewhere. I apologize for not putting up, not posting on Moodle, but I forgot. So please take a moment to either memorize or write this question down, so that when I break you up into groups, you'll be able to talk about it. Okay, maybe I'll give you 10 seconds to write this down. Okay, I think that was 10 seconds. Okay, and for those of you who are actually here, I mean, here in the physical classroom, I'll be putting it on the screen so you can continue to see it. Okay, so I'm going to break you up into groups. Let's see how many people are on Zoom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, wait, it does make sense. Sorry. Oh, wait, there are 9 people. Okay. So there are 9 people on Zoom. And let's see how many people are in the classroom. 2, 4, 6. I mean 5. Okay. Let's see. Let's try this. Okay. So let me break the people in this classroom into the group first. Okay. So you're 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1. Okay. So I don't really care how to do it. Maybe the 1s communicate here and the 2s communicate over there. Okay. And then if you are in Zoom, I will go ahead. And as you know, like we did the last time, please choose one person to be the spokesperson for your group, so you can present your answer to the rest of the class. And I hope you remember what the question is. Yeah, it's just that one question, so we'll take maybe 10 minutes to discuss the question. Okay, so if you're on Zoom, I'm going to break you up into the groups right now. Okay, you should be getting an invitation to join the group. Please accept the invitation. Oh, okay. As for those of you who are in the classroom, please get in your groups right now and discuss the question.
not very sure. I mean, I feel like with free will, because sometimes I go to do things and stuff. I feel like I still have that decision even if like something is controlling me in a way. But then that decision could also go influenced by that reaction. My brain's also making it. That's why I don't think about it.
Because then, at least how he's just putting in the whole veto, I guess, veto is coming from you.
That's why I'm just like on the fence. I don't really know if either way.
You're either one side or the other. So if you make decisions to not do something,
Yeah.
You came to a decision. Okay. Conscious decision. Cool. Looks like you guys have an answer. Okay. Okay.
Okay, right. So I'm going to assume that the people on Zoom have an answer as well. So I'm going to go ahead and recall everybody from their respective breakout rooms. Okay, so right, welcome back from your breakout rooms. Okay, so for change, I'm going to start by asking to hear from the people on Zoom. Okay, so the question is, if conscious vetoing is possible, then do we have free will? Okay, so let's start with the room that has Devin and Gavin in it. Oh, excuse me. What do you guys think?
Sorry, we couldn't find the questions that you was asking.
Oh, you mean
So
so
we-
you? Sorry, I interrupted you. You're going to say?
Also, we just discussed just discussion of free will, if we really do have it or not.
So what do you guys? Okay, yeah, let's go. Let's just go with that. So what do you guys? What did you guys say about free will? Do we have it?
I would say that we do have free will, and then in the end, because it's ultimately up to us, like what we choose, even if it's like kind of premeditated, I guess.
Even if it turns out that every single thing that you think and see yeah, is the result of things that are fed into your brain, would you still think you have free will in that case?
I guess you don't. Actually, that's kind of that terms, because you don't know what. I guess you can be being like what kind of info you're being fed. I guess. So I guess you do have a point right there. It could be like false and misleading.
Right. So would you think if it turns out that you don't actually have the body that you do, or you don't have any of if it turns out that you don't really have any of the things that you think you have, or any of the experiences, if it turns out that you are just a brain and nothing else, and you are just a brain in a vat, and everything that you have ever experienced is because of wires that are attached to your brain. Do you think you have free will in that case? Devin?
No. Yeah, I guess you wouldn't have free will because if those cords to your brain could be like just information being fed to you doesn't mean it's the right information. I guess it can be misleading.
I see. Okay. Cool. Okay. Thanks. Let me hear from the other groups. The group with Haley Crowder and Jared Mitton. What do you guys think?
We said we do have free will because you have the decision whether or not to like perform the action, and your brain processes the thought of whether or not to do it, and from there you can make your own decision.
Right. So you guys think that if you have the chance, if the brain can, if you can veto, if you can consciously veto what your brain is trying to do, then you basically have free will because maybe because you have the final say or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That is very interesting. Okay. Cool. Thank you. What about the group with Sarah Miller and Sayer?
So basically, for us, we went on to the discussion about the idea of the state of confusion, where if you truly do not have free will, then why would you be in a state of confusion? Confusion isn't necessarily considered an emotion. There's no chemical behind it. You're just hesitant to do one thing or the other. You can't make a decision. So if there's something making you do these decisions, then why would you be confused about anything?
Okay, so confusion, being confused is a sign that you have free will, because it's a sign that there is some, how do I say this? It's a sign that there is some indeterminacy going on in you, that everything is maybe not decided in advance or something like that.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. That's very interesting. Haven't really thought about that. Okay. I'm trying to. I don't mean to be difficult, but that's kind of a job. Okay. Since it's my job to be difficult, I will try being difficult. I was wondering, couldn't the determinists say, look, even those times when you are confused, even those times when you are experiencing confusion, the experience of confusion is basically just one of the many experiences that can be fed into your brain through those wires. So, just as the wires can feed the experience of you tasting a piece of steak, the wires can also feed the experience of you being confused, the experience of confusion into the brain. Yeah, I mean, couldn't the determinists say that confusion, your state of confusion can also be fed into the wires, through the wires?
Well, then wouldn't you have to consider whether or not confusion is an emotion? Do you consider confusion emotion? If true, then you may be right about the wires. If it's not, then you're wrong.
Okay, so if confusion is an emotion, then so are you saying that maybe if it is an emotion, then it is something that can be fed to you through the wires, because it's like because an emotion is basically something that that can be programmed, and that it can be fed to you through some by stimulating certain parts of your brain to make you have the emotion. But if it's not an emotion, then you cannot stimulate confusion in that way, and so therefore it cannot be fed through the wires. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because, well, everything fed to your brain is usually chemical reactions. We don't know of chemical reactions for confusion. So.
Okay, Bracken has something to say. Bracken.
Well, that whole confusion thing actually is really interesting, but I almost think that the confusion kind of does prove that there is free will, because if you're have like either your certain little thoughts or whatever, but when you are confused, it's you can't decide whether to to veto or to not to veto your thought or whatever. And so if how was I thinking this? It sounded good in my head, now it's not coming out well. If there's this kind of it could be an emotion, like dissonance in your head, like you can't, there's nothing really going on, it's just fighting itself. So if there was constant, like wires and information, how could it be fighting itself? I guess that didn't come out as well as I hoped it would, but.
Okay, well, that's the struggle of philosophy. There are lots of things that sound really good in our heads, but it always comes out sounding confused. And one could argue that what makes some people better philosophers than others is their ability to sort out the confusion in their heads. Confusion again. Sort out the confusion in their heads and turn it into words that sound okay. Okay, but sorry, that's really a remark. It's not really. That's not really about free will. It's more about philosophy in general. Okay, but coming back to the topic. So dissonance. So perhaps what you are saying is that something like, look, if if all these impulses are being fed to you through wires, why would there be cross signals, right? Confusion implies that maybe there are cross signals, maybe whatever it is that is feeding you the impulses is not working as it should. And it seems that if somebody is like in the matrix feeding you all these impulses,
sounds like they should know what they're doing, and and there shouldn't be all these cross signals or dissonance. It's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and also kind of on the lines of like, you're, I'm still thinking, confusion is deciding whether to veto the thing or not. If you're almost having to make a decision about which decision to make, it's like kind of an up to that. And so I just can't see, all these wires and things. Sure, like you're having the wrist, whether to move it or not, but if you just cannot decide whether to move it or not, you're in that state of, I kind of lost where I was going with that. Almost, you have to make a decision, and even if you have that like illusion of a decision coming through the wires, then there wouldn't be a struggle against itself. You wouldn't have the illusion of a decision if you're already making a decision, if the decision even exists. I guess, man, that's not coming up well.
Okay, maybe it's useful if I ask you a question, and I'm not just asking you. Maybe I'm asking everybody as well. So now, right now, we are supposing that a conscious veto is possible, and that we are also supposing that in that instant where you are trying to decide whether to veto the brain, there is maybe a short moment of confusion because you're trying to decide what to do, or maybe at least a short moment of indecision. Okay, let's assume. Actually, let's assume a couple of things. Okay, I know that you guys that are out there in Zoom probably won't be able to see the board, but I'll try to articulate. I'll try to articulate as best as I can what I'm saying. So let's make two assumptions. Let's assume two things. First, let's assume that whatever is doing the vetoing, let's call it I'm going to call it the vetoer. Okay, assume that the vetoer, this is a horrible marker. But anyway, okay, assume that the vetoer is separate. Is separate from the brain, right? So the brain has there's this brain activity, but then there is also this thing called the vetoer that is that is observing the brain and notices that something is coming out of the brain, and it says, oh, let's veto it. So the vetoer, whatever the vetoer is, it may be the soul, it may be the mind, I don't care. But let's not worry about that for right now. Let's just assume that whatever the vetoer is separate from the brain. It's not the same thing. Okay. And then the second assumption that I want to make is that, and this is a tricky assumption to make, but I'm going to make it anyway. Let's assume that the veto always fails. As I say, it's kind of a tricky assumption to make because you might think that's not true. But assume that whenever you are thinking about, even when you decide to veto the brain always wins. Okay, so assume that the brain always wins. Assume that if there is again flexing the wrist, right? If there is a brain impulse to flex the wrist, and I say, oh, let's not flex the wrist, this part always loses and the brain always just will win. So I always end up flexing the wrist anyway. Okay, so given these two assumptions, given that the vetoer is separate from the brain, and given that the veto always fails, okay, given these two things, now the same question. Question is, do we have free will? Or is there free will? Okay, so given that the vetoer is separate from the brain, and given that the veto always fails, is there free will? Okay, maybe Bracken shouldn't be doing all the work thinking so much. Okay, I'm going to put you guys on the spot. Given these two things, is there free will? No.
Because even if you can choose to veto it, you can't act on that choice. So, because if you're assuming the veto always fails, that means that you can't carry it out, right? Like you can't act on it.
If you're still thinking that decision, even though it's not happening, you're still have the thought of doing the other thing.
Yeah. So even though you have that thought, though, if it doesn't get carried out, then what's the point of having the thought in the first place?
The point is to have the thought. I mean, I see where you're coming from, right? Basically, you're saying, look, if the veto always fails, then that should show that you don't have free will because the veto never leads to effective action or something like that. Yeah, but somebody else might say, true, the veto never leads to effective action. But the point of free will, right? Free will is different from free action. Freedom of will is different from freedom of action. So even if none of your choices lead to action, it still won't change the fact that you did make the choice in the first place. So, and if you did make the choice, even if it never led to action, then one could argue that there is freedom of choice, even if there is no freedom of action. And if all we need in order to have free will is freedom of choice, then freedom of, then even if the vetoer is never effective, even if the veto always fails, there is still free will. In this case, it's kind of like, you can imagine the vetoer to be some kind of prisoner, maybe. The vetoer is like a prisoner that is imprisoned inside, maybe inside the brain. And the vetoer is imprisoned inside the brain and is trying to oppose the brain. But the brain is a lot more powerful. So the brain always ends up overriding the veto. So the veto is always fails. The veto is never effective. It never manages to rebel successfully against the brain. But one could argue that, look, I mean, even if a rebellion is not successful, it is still a rebellion. And if a rebellion is all you need for free will, then then that's free will. Have I heard from all of the groups on Moodle? Oh, I did. Okay. Yeah. So as you can see, I am quite undecided about. I'm really quite undecided about this free will thing. I mean, it looks like, I don't know, I mean, it's starting to look like maybe compatibilism. I mean, if everything that I just said is true, if everything that I just said is correct, then it's starting to look like maybe compatibilism is the way to go. Because, you know, again, right, even if everything is determined, even if there is no way to do anything other than rob the bank, if there is even the possibility that there is a vetoer in the brain that's trying to change things, but it's never successful, then then you could argue that an ineffective rebellion is still a rebellion, and if the presence of a rebellion is all you need in order to establish the presence of free will, then you have free will, even if the free will never leads to free action. So the whole point of talking about all this, the whole purpose of talking about this is to try to help you out about the whole about this. You and Jacob actually is to help you and Jacob out about this, about what you were saying about confusion. I wonder if we can apply the same thing that I said about vetoing to confusion. So if there is confusion if confusion is present in the brain or in the, whatever you want to call it, in the will, if confusion is present in the will, and it tries, and even if it exists only for a short, brief instant of time, even if the brain ultimately has its way, and confusion ultimately, is resolved or disappears, I guess the question is, is the presence of confusion is the presence of confusion enough to establish that there is free will? Well, here's another difficulty. You see, with veto, right? With a veto, it is. I think it's quite easy. It's quite easy to say that vetoing is free will, because when you are vetoing something, you're making a very clear decision, right? I don't want to flex my wrist. That's basically the decision. But with confusion, when you're confused, you're not making a decision, right? You are totally undecided. And that's problematic because with vetoing, we can say that there is a very clear, there's a clear direction. There's a clear direction that, there's a clear direction. There's a clear direction that the decision is going, right? Don't flex the wrist. But with confusion, there is just confusion. There is no clear direction. We don't know where anything is going. If you think of confusion as being like chaos, right? Then the question is, I don't know, is chaos the same thing as free will? Let's ask Jacob. Hey, Jacob, what do you think? So if confusion is chaos, is chaos the same as free will?
What did we define? Why did we define confusion as chaos? Is my question.
I don't know. I couldn't think of a better definition of confusion, so I just chaos. But I don't know. Do you have a better definition?
I'd say confusion would be a state of hesitance. but that's a very basic definition of it. But if we were to define it as chaos, then it'd still be free will, wouldn't it? Because there isn't one set path, it's just chaotic, so it's still random. You may not get the specifically choose, but hey, there's no like specific driving force behind it. So it's technically still free will. And technically not, I don't know.
I feel that that is a problematic statement. I mean, problematic doesn't mean you're wrong. Problematic means, there are problems. I was going to say more, but let's see what Bracken has to say.
I just had a thought that came up. I'd almost say that, maybe because we're, bound by time or whatever, something always has to be happening. And so if you're, in the, if your state of confusion, you've almost decided to not decide. And so, you're still in that state of, something has kind of, like before the decision, you're just kind of doing whatever, and then the decision that you need to do comes up, and then you're not sure whether to do it or not, but because something has to always be happening, you've almost made it not really like a full-on, full-hearted, I have decided to be confused, that's just what has to happen because you're not deciding anything. And so that's almost like, I'm not sure, I just kind of thought of that and how that would play into, if something has to be happening. So if you're in a state of confusion, you haven't decided yet, but you're in a state of deciding, so you've decided to decide. That's a lot of words. But
Yeah, okay. So that actually may be helpful because when Jacob said that confusion is a state of hesitancy rather than a state of chaos, that we still have to basically explain why hesitancy is somehow more free than chaos. Because when something is chaos, right? It's basically just like it's just like a swamp where there's a whole bunch of stuff floating in it, and you wouldn't say that a swamp is free, but if confusion is more like hesitancy, in which case you are deciding not to decide, or you are deciding not to decide because you want to take time to reach a decision, then that would indicate that would suggest that somebody is deciding not to decide, right? So there is some kind of agency involved. And if there is some kind of agency involved, then then it's deliberate and therefore maybe it's free. Because the idea is that in order for there to be a free will, there has to be somebody who's doing the free willing, right? There has to be some kind of person who's deciding. And in this case, it's deciding not to decide, which is great. So maybe if there is confusion and there is hesitation, there is somebody who's doing the hesitation, somebody who's deciding not to decide, and that might suggest, the keyword here suggests, it doesn't conclude anything, it might suggest that there is free will. Oh my gosh, I ran over time. Okay, so next week we are basically going to watch one of my favorite movies, Parasite, and then I'll give you some questions to discuss. And okay, so see you next week. Thank you.